And if you're on the other side of the wall, please let's come in here. People who are outside, please let's come in. Thank you. And you now join me to welcome our professor, Professor Emmanuel Afolabi Bakare, it's on the last lecture for the day. Thank you so much, Prof.
So I'm going to start from where we stopped yesterday, where we are looking at the heterogeneity that exists in epidemiological models, given that you develop a model that captured the system as if everybody in the population have the same characteristics. Is a good starting point, but it should not be the end. And that was how we began yesterday by introducing these aspects. Now, I think, okay. Yeah, so I stopped around this, okay, yeah. So, I laid the foundation bringing to our mind that we need to go beyond the homogeneous model that we have been discussing so far and coming to the side of looking at other aspects of characteristics of the population that can influence the dynamics of any particular disease or that you are looking at. Now, it came to the point where we've talked about measles of childhood diseases that like measles, chickenpox, that have a high reproductive number, which means that the average age at first infection is low, and therefore they are also commonly encountered during childhood. And we also discussed the fact that the modeling of this so-called childhood disease also requires further partitioning of the population, starting from in terms of age. So we talked about age structure. We also talked about risk structure when it comes to STIs, that's sexually transmitted infections, and like gonorrhea, syphilis, and HIV. And now, so for STIs, the subdivisions are determined by the number of contacts. So now we discussed that different kinds of partners can also lead to high-risk individuals in the population. And then we also talked about for childhood diseases, in contrast, the subdivision are due to the nature of the contact. So now, because such diseases are common in childhood, but rare in adults, like measles, mumps, and all that, they are most common among children. And then those individuals who mix most with children are at great risk. Now, due to their aggregation in schools, children predominantly mix with other children, and therefore age act as a major determinant of risk. So today we will continue, and both of these examples show how differential patterns of mixing influence the likelihood of contracting and transmitting the infection. Now, looking at the nature of the contacts or the number of contacts can influence whether somebody will contract or transmit an infection. Now, some subset of the population are clearly at greater risk, whereas some are relatively isolated. And that was how we talked about the high risk group and the low risk group. Now, by incorporating such heterogeneities into models, we gain three distinct advantages. Number one is the aggregate behavior of the models becomes more accurate. Now, introducing heterogeneities into your models makes your model to be better to be more accurate. Like I said yesterday, that the issue of complexities is a very, very important thing to look at, because if the model is going to be realistic, it has to be complex. So complexity can be introduced as we go on. Now we can determine the prevalence of infection within. So number one thing we can do is that the aggregate behavior of models become more accurate when you put them, when you classify them according to their distinct features. For instance, you are looking at age, or you are looking at it for the point of view of their risk level. And then the other one is that we can also determine the prevalence of infection within the different classes. You know what we mean by prevalence now, so that at least the total number of both old and new cases of infection at an instant of time. And finally, we can use this information to determine more efficient targeted measure for this control. Now, if you remember during COVID-19, a lot of models were coming out, who were developing different kind of models, those that are useful and those that are not useful, who were doing many things. But in the long run, we realized that now the best model that was able to capture COVID-19 well was an age structure model, because COVID-19 affected mostly people who are seniors, people who are above 60 and above, who have the underlying or compromised systems. So, and then you find out that for each country, when you talk about like COVID-19, for each country, it was never the same thing in terms of the pyramids of population. Because if you go to countries like Europe, where there are older people, you find out that the rate at which COVID-19 spread in Europe was not the same thing as Nigeria, because the population pyramid of Nigeria is different from that of Europe. And then you find out that in Nigeria has large population of young people that are people below 50 or 55 years. There are more than people above 55 years in Nigeria. So you find out that in the long run, COVID-19 that was supposed to spread so much in Nigeria, we don't, because the age structure for Nigeria was different from Europe and other parts of the world. And then some younger people had COVID-19 because they have a very strong level of immunity. After some time, they didn't even go to hospital. They were not quarantined, and then they survived it. So because most of them did not have any underlying issue. Now, with this kind of introducing heterogeneity, you can give us a light on how to determine more efficient targeted measure of the control. Now, what happened was that during COVID-19, now when it was discovered that from the model, that the older population are transmitting and are contracting more of the infection. So what happened was that now was the model predicted that, so it shows that now who are we to give the vaccination first? Those are the people they gave vaccination to for first before they consider other persons. So with the use of heterogeneous model, to find out that you are able to not just capture the prevalence in a particular set, it also gives us the ability to know which group do we target first for any control intervention that would needed to be deployed. And this can guide, policy, it can guide decisions among policymakers. Now, improving risk heterogeneity inevitably increases the number of equations. Now, like I said yesterday, that normally if I For most of the models you have developed that are from the basic SIR model, you find out that these are quite like simple model, like estate pointers. You have this kind of stuff. This is three-dimensional stuff. So now these are very quite easy. But if I'm going to introduce, maybe I want to introduce age structure, I will need to, maybe I have to change, I'm going to say maybe juvenile, and then juvenile, and then I will still have to repeat the same, but now this time for adults. Juvenile and adult. So I have, at the end of the day, I'm having like 6 instead of 3. Because I have juvenile compartments, which happens to SI, SJ, IJ, RJ, and then this one, they move from juvenile to adults. It's a kind of maturation. I'm going to show that kind of model afterwards. So there's a movement, people move from here, after some time, they move to at certain rates. So this is the kind of thing we have, and even if it's going to be, this is majorly for disease like measles, because I'm dealing with age structure. But the other one, that is maybe HIV and other STIs, they have to be like low, and then low and high. That is, this is low risk. These are low risk group, and then I have the high risk group. Now, you find out that incorporating high risk and low risk classes with STI becomes models that doubles. An STI model doubles the number of equations compared to homogeneous, which is average model. Now, so if it's homogeneous, to be treated like this, but since I am making it heterogeneous, then the equation doubles. And then with each structure model, we can have tens of age classes. I can decide to have, this one is just 2. I'm saying juvenile, maybe people below 5, right? We call them juvenile or infants. And then these people are above 5 years. That's adults. But it will go better than that, depending on what I want to look at. Like I can decide depending on the disease, disease also, that's why in all of the classes, we have said that if you want to develop a good model, you need a very clear understanding of the biology, the epidemiology, and the medical context of the disease. Now, if you don't have that understanding, your mathematics will be wrong. Now, the question when it comes to modeling in epidemiology or mathematics in epidemiology, or using maths to solve problems in epidemiology, the problem does not come from maths. The problem comes from the epidemiology. But the tool, the method of solution comes from maths. So it means that if I don't have a good grasp of the epidemiology of any disease that I want to work on, or the biology, or the medical context, I cannot do anything there. Because now I'll be wrongly placing things. You'll be placing things wrongly. You'll be dividing things wrongly. Then apart from having the epidemiology, you also have to, especially if you want to do anything that has to do with demography, you have to have an understanding of the demography of that population. Now, I'm working on a Nigerian population now, or let's take for instance, 80 states. I need to understand, before I can introduce demography features of this model, I need to understand the demography of 80 states. How are what is the lower bound and the upper bound in terms of that disease? How the disease spread among those populations? So I need to understand that for me to be able to fix my model into different structure. Now, so in this situation now, I'm not only talking about technology, I'm also looking at the demography in terms of age. So age is also depending on time. Age is a function of time. But age is not the same thing as time in this respect. Are you getting me now? Age is not the same thing as time, but it's a function of time. So what we are looking at now, we are looking at people at different ages, between 0 and 5 or less than 5, and then 5, maybe 5 to 10 or 5 to 15, also maybe between 15 and, I don't know, certain age. And then if I want to talk about adults, maybe I should be talking about people from 30 and above, depending. So I may need to do, so if I'm having like 5 different age groups, for instance, I'm having 5 different age groups for a particular disease. It means that the number of my equations are going to be more. So if for instance, I develop SIR for that particular model, I didn't consider other distinct classes or groups. I just say SIR. So for this SIR, I may be having like maybe 15 different classes, maybe for one age group, and then another age group. At the end of the day, I may be having like 45 equations when it comes to this. So you will find out that now with age structure models, we can have tens of age classes. The increase in number of equations is even more pronounced. And then however, the equation for each class can vary, class have a very similar structure. You will see that each of the equations here, by the time we are writing it, they are going to have similar structure. Those are things you have to note. And then, so an increase in their number does not correspond to an increase in the intellectual challenge or computational difficulty. Now, merely an increase in computational time. So if you have that kind of system that is like 50 set of equations because you are capturing a lot, and you need a good computer to be able to give you the your solution in a very short time. Because this one we face, the only challenge we face here is not computational difficulty but computational time. So the number of time, especially if you now want to fit again, you now need more time, or you need a better computer, maybe like a supercomputer, high power computer, to be able to do this kind of work. And then, however, including heterogeneity does not increase the number of parameters. It is necessary, number of parameters it is necessary to estimate. This often translates into a need for more biological data. So it does increase the number of parameters that is necessary to estimate, which often translates into a need for more biological data. Now, because you are having so many parameters in the model, there may be need for you to get more information about those parameters in terms of the data available. Now, generally, it is preferable to have a case report or other information subdivided into the same classes as used in the model, because this simplifies parameterization and comparison of model results with data. So now, in terms of, say for instance now, I'm capturing people under the age of maybe 5, say for instance for my area, and then 5 and above, and I have a data on that, then it will be easier. But if you don't have a data that captures different age groups, it may be difficult for you to, like, if you want to do a quantitative model, it will be very hard for you to be able to parameterize and give a good parameter estimation. Finally, so we consider levels of heterogeneity within the infected class, discriminating between individuals due to the time since infection. So if you look at this, you see now, so levels of heterogeneity within the infected class. Like, for instance, if I want to maybe I just want to look at this class, the adults that are infected or infectious, and then the juvenile that are also infected. So this may be a class that I've been focusing on in terms of maybe I want to fit. And you get what I'm saying now? In terms of my fitting, I may be able to look at these two classes to collapse them together and see what will happen. Then, frequently, very accurate data is available to parameterize these forms of model, where the distribution of latent and infection period is well known. So you will face challenge with data availability once the model becomes more complex. Because you are having so many parameters, you are having so many the structure of the model has increased, and then there are a lot of things that you have factored in. Now, although these changes in the shape of the distribution may at first appear trivial, they can often have a profound impact on the infection dynamics. You know, like initially when you look at it, you may be that, in the real sense, you are featuring something that is more important in terms of the transmission of the disease when it comes to, for instance, measles or some of these other diseases like malaria that we have been looking at. Now, ultimately, 3 applied questions drive the work in this section. How does risk structure influence the spread and prevalence of pathogens? How does risk structure influence either low risk or high risk in terms of among STIs? And then even in malaria, now there are high risk zones and there are low risk zones, even when it comes to malaria. In Nigeria, there are certain locations in Nigeria that are low risk. There are certain locations or states in Nigeria that are high risk. Now, sometimes when you look at urban, peri-urban, and then you look at rural setting, how does malaria? There are certain rural settings that are more dangerous than urban setting or peri-urban setting. So these are things that, you know, we can build some risk structure models on, and then can risk structure be used to more effectively control the spread of infection. Now, when it comes to vaccination in Nigeria, people began to look at the first 2 states that were deployed was based on the model were low risk state and high risk states. High risk state was Kebbi, and the low risk was Bayelsa, right? Because the model predicted that, and we have the map, we have everything about it. So when vaccination was to be given in Nigeria, it was sent to those 2 locations. Those are 2, especially, those are 2 major low risk and high risk zones, states. So now, why do they do that? They were doing that because they want to see what will happen. We introduce this thing here. What do we want to achieve in the presence of other interventions available? Now, the next question is, how can risk structure be parameterized in realistic scenarios? In realistic scenarios, how can risk structure be parameterized in realistic scenarios? So to answer this question, we need to extend the basic models of earlier talk to include the various risk groups. So basic model cannot answer this kind of question. Like normal homogeneous model, yes I have, yes I have, yes here I have, and all of that. You will need to start from there, and then you need to build your complexity more. Now, note this. Now, the basic reproduction ratio for the entire population is bounded by values for individuals in this group. Bounded by values of individuals in this group. Number 2, the basic reproduction number from structure model is generally larger than if the structure were ignored and all individuals have the same average transmission rates. That was what I said yesterday. Now, to emphasize it. Now, the basic reproduction ratio is found using an eigenvalue approach. Now, sources of heterogeneity contacts. Now, heterogeneity contact, individual exposure and infection hazard may be heterogeneous for a number of reasons. One, risk structure. It will be determined by behavioral patterns. Like what I said yesterday, you have more than 2 sex partners, 3 sex partners, 5 sex partners. It's a behavioral attitude. It can influence anything in your life when it comes to infection, either contracting or transmitting. Like the case I gave, somebody was praying, used to go and pray somewhere, and then because of the prayer, either they were seeking for something, they contacted HIV. And then they brought the HIV home. Family got it. The wife and the husband died. They left their children there. So this can happen. So you find out that, and you have people, especially who are driving, like all these trailer drivers. In all the states in Nigeria, they have wives. So if they still in this state today, they have the wife there, they have almost all the states. So at the end of the day, they now have the real wife they marry. So when they come back at the end of the month, they bring disease to the woman at home and doesn't do anything from all those other ones. So these are, so this structure can be determined by the behavioral pattern. The behavioral pattern can also be in terms of your nutritional status, whether you eat the right food or not, and then all related to occupation. Now, the kind of job you do that exposes you, like take for instance now, people who are taking care of Lassa River patients. So there is what we call nosocomial infection in Lassa River, where people who are taking care of people who are having Lassa River, they have the highest risk of contracting Lassa River. Yes, they have had records of doctors and nurses dying in those states here. You know, because from those states and they know that they have the highest prevalence of Lassa River in Nigeria. So you find out that people who are taking care of them because of their occupation, it can be exposed. So you can, factoring that kind of thing in the model and help us to be able to track, who are those people in the population that's, and in the long run, that needs, maybe we can do some scenarios to predict who are those people, which population do we target first in a particular disease spread. And then the age determine contact. Childhood diseases. You said malaria can also be factor into that. Measles, mumps, and what have you. Bring up. Now, seasonality also, time-dependent contact rates result in sustained oscillation. You find out that we are having systematic peak of infection at certain time of the year. Now, what is causing that? When we are having this peak, when it comes to maybe April every year, April 2026, April 2025, April 2024, 2027, like that. Seasonality, or in mathematics, to go mathematical more, it's not periodicity. So you are having this periodic oscillation like that in a model or in a pattern. So it's not just something to overlook, something to pay attention to. Like what is really driving this? What is bringing this? Now, harmonic oscillations or harmonic resonance and bifurcations. So these are things, that can influence contact rates, right? And then the STDs and the SIS model develop a simple model for a non-immunizing infection that's only clear through treatments. Now, if somebody has some of these diseases we are talking about, you cannot depend on natural immunity. If you are not treated, okay, you can't get recover. And even your recovery still takes you back to success. That's why we call it SIS. You don't recover fully, you recover to become vulnerable. So that means you can still catch it again. Your recovery is not permanent. So for any STDs, whether syphilis, once you get syphilis in your life, or you get gonorrhea, you can't fully recover. You only recover to be vulnerable. right? So you find out that, I mean, if you look at this, this is just a normal, what's it called, homogeneous model, where you just factor the, I mean, the R0 is beta or gamma and all that, and you find out that this is this shows the fraction of people infected and then the time in years, and then the various values of R0 are plotted over the years, and then you have simple contact heterogeneities. Now, contact tracing to examine HIV transmission network in Colorado Springs. Now, what happened during COVID-19? We were doing contact tracing. Now, contact tracing is a form of control, but it's not a control like that. Now, why do I call this what I can call a social control? Now, what are they trying to do? They are trying to trace people who have had contact with somebody who has been infected. Like the first guy that came from Italy in February 28, 2020, brought Italian guy that brought COVID-19 to Nigeria. Everybody that was in that plane with him, they were contact traced. Because if the contact tracing said that everyone that have had contacts, including the air hostess and the pilot, I have contact with that guy as suspects. So we need to contact trace them. And then, so contact trace them to do what? To be able to quarantine and test after some days. To know, I mean, after incubation period, if they go whether they show symptoms or not, or whether they are asymptomatic. So these are things. So then, number of sexual partners in homosexual men in London. Now you have number of partners per month and then the frequency. So you find out that these are simple contact heterogeneities. This one and then that one. And then you have modeling restructure. You have introduced a model consisting of individuals whose behavior and work places them in one or two kinds of groups, low risk and high risk. So you look at the model here. So you have susceptible who are low risk, infected who are low risk, and then susceptible who are high risk, and then infected who are high risk. And then you have, so we use an extension of simple SIS model, which captures, for this class, you have the susceptible who are low risk, and then the gamma health IL minus this is the transmission parameter, the rate at which the low risk and the low risk they susceptible and infected, the transmission, and then this is cause of infection at which the susceptible low risk acquired infection from the due to the presence of the infected low risk, and then the rate at which the high risk, the susceptible low risk got the infection from the high risk, and the same thing appears here. I mean, everyone from here goes here, and then people from here, they go out of and then you have the same thing. The only thing, if you look at this, the only thing is that you find out that these two classes are just repeated. The parameters are changed. So in this situation now, you have no parameters because you have decided to break the risk structures into two. And then you find out that at this point you have BHL, which is from high to low. So the infection is coming from low to high, from low to high. That means from infected that are low to susceptible that are high. And then this also means that the infection here is coming from infected that are low to susceptible that are high. And then this one is coming from high infected to low susceptible. And so what is R0 here? Instead of a single transmission rate, like the normal of instead of a single transmission rate, you have to so you find out that the matrix of parameters start from where? Start from, look at this, the SH and IH. Look at it. You look at this. So for this, we consider the IH and the IL. So if you bring the IH and the IL together, you will find out that you will have DH IH plus BFH SH IH minus gamma H IH. And then you have DIL, which is equal to E beta NH SL IH plus NL SL IL minus gamma L IL. So here you find out that your beta is not the same thing as the normal beta you have. In this situation, because we are having two risk structure group, the low high risk and then the low risk. So you find out that the BHH, which is this, and then BHL, and then BLH, or yes, so our BL here. So you have beta is going to be beta HH, beta HL, and then beta NH and beta NN. I'll come to beta. So what happened there is this is called what if. What if is you acquire infection from whom matters. Now, you acquire infection from whom? So this one acquire infection from when? From IH. And then this acquire infection from IL. This acquire infection from IH. And this acquire infection from IL. Now, the two, you will see that typically it's assumed that beta LH, that is plus one and diagonal, and beta HL, they are what? They are same. They are same. Now, and I as a sensitivity such that BHH is greater than BLN, and BLN is greater than BHL. Now, initial dynamics. Let's explore this with a simple paid-off example. We assume 80% of population is in low risk group, with only 20% in high risk category. And then the Y-if matrix is assumed to be the following form. For simplicity, we have the gamma H and the gamma L equals to 1. You can work out the R naught. Now, given this was given, just assume that the beta is, since it's very high, 10, and then 0.1, because the diagonals are the same. So we can work out R naught H by having, since the 20% is in high risk group, and then the 80% is in low risk group. So we have 10 multiplied by 0.2 plus 0.1 times 0.8, making 2.08. And then for similarly for R0L, which means that is in the low risk, the reproduction number for the low risk is going to be 0.1 times 0.2, which is 20% high risk, plus 1 times 0.8, which is for this group. Now, these calculations are useful when we start with infected only in high or low risk group. So over the years, you find out that the IH that grows between 0 and 1, and then from 0 and 1, you from over 2 years, this began to increase until it comes to a flattening point where you have that all the infected a high risk group, they began to increase. Given that SH, that is the susceptible in the high risk group, is 0.997, and SL is equal to 0. Now, these calculations are useful when we start with infected only in high or low risk group. And then you have, so when you start with high, you can see what is the pattern we are having. And then when we start with low, you see the pattern we are having. The initial dynamics, these calculations are useful when we start with infected only in high or low risk groups. However, soon they will be infected in both groups, and this quantity become uninformative, like this. And this IL of 0 at the initial will be maybe equal to 0, even this condition we have there. Then these equations are useful when we start with infected only in high or low risk group. However, soon they will be infected in both groups, and this quantity become uninformative. Now, these calculations are useful when we start with infected only in high or low risk group. However, soon they will be infected in both groups, and this quantity becomes uninformative. Now, we need to examine eigenvalues start by linearizing about disease-free equilibrium. Now, modeling risk group, you have at the disease-free states, you have SH equal to NH, and then XL equal to NL. So in that situation, I think we have defined something there before. Yeah, so where we define NL, 1 is equal to NL plus NH, and then NL, which is total population of the low risk group, is equal to XL plus IL, and then total population of the high risk group is equal to XH plus IH. So with that, you can find, given this, what we have here, we have this, which is a Jacobian, yes. So we have this, if you bring this IH and then IH, IL, you have this, and multiply, you are going to have that. The dominant eigenvalue standard one is 1.0013. So initially, both H and YL as E raised for lambda 1 T. Now, okay, so here we have the infectious individuals over this time, 0 to 15 years, and then you have the low risk, and then you have the high risk, and then you have the slave to adults. So, and for this particular group, you what you focus on majorly is on the prevalence. The prevalence of the low risk over a period of time, and then the prevalence of the high risk over this period of time. Now, because after a short while, both IH and IV have same growth rates, we say their dynamic are slaves. And we now work out fractions of infected in each class during this slave phase. You know, when you say slave, it's just like the word for the word slave, slavery. So all these RH and IV and calculate them from rate to the eigenvector associated with dominant eigenvalue, and RH is 0.9376 and IL is 0.0624. Now these values are then used to weigh the R of X. Now, if you remember this, in each class, in order to obtain an overall R naught. Now you have R naught equals to R naught H multiplied by
Goodness.
IH. IH plus R naught L IL. So from here, you have, already we have this information in the other, from this other R naught we have gotten before, which is R naught H for this. This is R naught L. This is the value of the R naught L. And then you find out that if you bring in all of this together, you are going to have your R naught to be 2.0013, which is far greater than 1. So the equilibrium prevalence in our example, we see that RH at T equals to tends to infinity 0.1 and IL as T tends to infinity 0.033. So where did this now you find out that when R naught is equal to 2, and from our structured models, we may have expected to see as the disease goes into extinction, then what is going to happen to the susceptible population? That's what we are looking at there. And then the control implication, random vaccination, eradication threshold is 1 minus 1 over R naught, which determines the R ability. And then you can do much better, fewer units of vaccine use by targeting high risk group. These are different scenarios. Severe penalties for ignoring high risk group. So you have the total population, which is in dark, and then the high risk group, the low risk group, and then the optimum. So you have here the population of vaccination, the percentage from 30 to 100%. And then the first part has to do with the eradication impossibly. And then the random vaccination. And at this point, you find out that the low risk group, you find out that the high risk group, here the total population is actually going until it gets to around 50%. And then the high risk I think this is the low risk group, yes, and then the high risk group. Now, the footnote calculating R naught in previous calculation we specify who acquire infection from who matches. Alternatively, one may assume proportionate mixing. Let GH be the probability that the partner choosing will be in the high risk group. This is the high risk group. We use this formula. You have CH, which is contact rates of the high risk group, multiplied by the total population, the contact rate of the high risk group plus contact rate of the low risk group. And then for GL, which is the probability that the partner will be choosing from the low risk group, given by this. Now you get two simultaneous equations for that. So proportionate mixing leads to higher estimates for R naught in this case. And you find out that the R naught is very high here because of proportionate mixing. And then the impact of heterogeneity, increasing variance in contact rate can lead to drastic rise in R naught. And see the situation we have here. The R naught is rising. So peak mean contact, average contact rate constant. Then summary, SIS product predicts stable infection prevalence as long as R naught is greater than 1. Incorporating this structure involves defining matches of transmission rates. Definition of R naught now slightly different. Calculating R naught more involved. Use eigenvalues and eigenvectors. Need to vaccinate less if we know who to target. We know who to target. Given your scenario, and we may need to vaccinate. That means vaccination will be cost effective in terms of you know the group to target. Now, ignoring high risk groups potentially very expensive in terms of control. Now, I want to move because yes, I will quickly, how many minutes do I have? I've exhausted it. Okay, let me just go through this part and then I'll stop. Maybe. So population heterogeneity can be heterogeneous in terms of model parameters. Like we were talking yesterday on the outdoor biting parameter and indoor biting parameter you introduce to your model can be a form of heterogeneity in terms of you have some part of the population that you subject to different distinct natures. So heterogeneity can come in terms of model parameters, and then it can come in terms of susceptibility. Like I said yesterday, you can have different susceptible class. Just like for this one, we had susceptible that are low, susceptible that are high risk. You can even divide to three and say susceptible that are medium risk. And then you have rate of recovery. You can subject the recovery rates into various heterogeneity, acquired immunity, contact rates, mortality, and disease-induced mortality. Now, heterogeneity model parameters may depend on demographic as such as age, socioeconomic status, that's, occupation, whether you are rich or you are poor, occupation, the kind of job you do, degree of contact, gender, species, individual characteristics. So maybe I should just stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, for Prof for that. I think we will not go too far, but what has been done already, lots has been done around heterogeneity that has to involve risk level, which Prof tried to take us through, and then the transmission, the contact metrics that we saw that coming up as against what you have for an homogeneous case when the transmission is just between homogeneous population. But here now we have high risk and low risk now. So the way things are different, the way the reproduction number values changes based on that. But then there are questions. I have already some questions, so let me also ask in case there are people with questions in the audience, one or two, join me in asking questions. So please signify, and then I'll give you a number. Question. Okay, let me start. Maybe when I start, others will get to ask their question. Prof, thank you so much. In the course of the presentation, while you have talked about the issue of risk, putting people into different classes. But I also know that sometimes, for instance, the case of Heavy and Bayelsa that you cited, unlike this one where we are also looking at the new acquired infection of women. Maybe I want to believe certain assumption also must be at the background to mean that the people are possibly in the same population, the high risk individuals and the low risk individual, and maybe and also spatially separated. Well, I'm looking at the situation where, for instance, people in Kebbi and people in Bayelsa, I want to model that. I see that some of our colleagues when that do something on high and low risk, still model it homogeneously, only hitting the data from the high risk and low risk and then being that separately without possibly because they are spatially separated. So what do we think when we consider high risk, low risk? What do you think about the situation where there is this separation in terms of the spatial, the distance? now that because the settings are far apart now.
Yeah.
So we may not need to close our eyes to the interaction between people in low risk and high risk. So I'm saying that necessarily this diagonal may have to go since because the people are not
You need to look at it spatially. You need to put interpretation. But in that situation of malaria, it's not really a bacteria.
yes, yes.
So you have to be contacting from human to human. You understand? But that one is human to mosquito. It's a different dynamic.
So I'm looking at if it is not malaria, for instance, I will still have a situation where because I'm looking at the fact that maybe they may like will it be realistic to say that maybe somebody like because we are considering within a country low risk or low risk but because we know the states
State.
yes
State A and
Yes.
state B.
they are low
So,
risk
like,
low risk
Bayelsa is low risk.
yes
Then Kebbi is high risk.
Okay.
I want to model that.
Mhm.
What's the challenge now is that they are far apart.
yes
You have
exactly
to measure. So the best way to measure is like I have two states, maybe like Ondo and
with our close
Abuja
Yeah.
that can like
commits
people commute from that place to the other. Maybe some people are working in Abuja, then they live in Nasarawa, and then mosquito biting in Abuja and Nasarawa, and then when to fall sick in his office. So they need to trace where you get infected and all of that.
Thank you so much, sir. So any other question as we round up this session? Okay, thank you so much. Please let's appreciate for that knowledge. Well, we're going to continue you. Thank you so much. We want to appreciate all lecturers from Professor Deepak, who started the day, and then to Professor Pretty, to Professor Emmanuel Bakari, who just ended this session. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. We appreciate the knowledge shared. And we believe that the knowledge shared will help all of it, will help us in one way or the other. And thank you also to all participants for staying through to this moment. Tomorrow, by God's grace, we are going to also start the session by 10 a.m. Please, so I think we started a bit behind schedule today. So let's arrive early tomorrow because tomorrow so what we are seeing information here is that for tomorrow, we want to start by 10 on the dot because invitation has gone to the entire campus. So we may have a larger house tomorrow, and then it's 10 on the dot. We want to start so that we can have enough time to. I think tomorrow we want to look at the issue of cervical cancer. That Professor Royal may also, yeah, and Professor Kuka, who will also be taking the first session. So please let's come on time 10. We want to start by 10 tomorrow. Then after that, between 12 and 1, we'll finish. Then after that, we want to explore the town together. Maybe some of you are interested. We just want to see some beautiful places in the town. All right, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the day. See you tomorrow. Yes, there's this code that was found. If you are the owner, please see me. It's here. There's this type C code that was found. If you are the owner, see me to claim the ownership. Proof of